There it goes. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This is the third part in our B2B crash course. If you haven't joined us before, there are 2 other B2B crash course sessions that you can find in the online English meetup group, including the recordings of the awesome presentations from Sarah and Vijayan. They are our wonderful product manager and product marketing manager for Anypoint Partner Manager. A lot of managers in there. And we're really excited to talk about some exciting updates, specifically about EDI mapping. I will be online behind the scenes. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Vijayan. Before I do, the Q&A tab, bottom right-hand corner of your screen is open. Please post any of your questions there so that we can get to them at the end of the session for Q&A. And with that, over to you, Vijayan.
Thank you, Sabrina. Can everyone see my screen? I
Yes,
hope so.
we can.
Okay. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Vijayan from the MuleSoft product team, and I have Sarah joining with me, leading the product marketing efforts for our B2B and EDA product lines. So today's session is going to be primarily focused on one of the most fundamental aspects of building B2B and EDA integrations, right? So obviously, kind of while we have a lot of partner onboarding and visibility and all those aspects, more from how you can operationalize a B2B integration. The backbone of any B2B integration is dependent on how effectively and efficiently we're able to build the translation maps from EDI to an internal message structure or internal message structure to EDI. So we're going to be kind of getting to the basics in this third and final course in the series on how you can leverage all the goodness that MuleSoft's data weave transformation engine offers in the context of mapping EDA documents. So we're going to be focusing primarily on inbound EDA data for now. And if there is interest, we'll be happy to host a follow-up session to cover any additional deep dive questions or outbound scenarios. But I think today's session, the audience will walk away with some better understanding of how to better leverage all the capabilities that DataWeave offers for mapping EDA data into an internal data format. So I introduced myself already, and I'm not going to be talking anything about any roadmap in today's session because we're talking about DataWeave, which has been on the platform for a long time. But if in case I do talk about any future roadmap items, please make sure you're making any commercial decisions based on capabilities that are available today. So before we get into the actual demonstration, just a quick context setting and recap of where B2B integrations kind of come into play in the grand scheme of things from an industry context standpoint. So we have organizations that need to interact and integrate with other organizations, whether it's a large retailer like a Best Buy or Amazon that needs to source products from consumer goods and manufacturing companies like Driscoll's or Procter & Gamble, or it can be an automobile manufacturer like a Tesla or BMW that has to buy tires from Bridgestone or electrical components from companies like Denso and Bosch. Or it can also be companies like Walgreens and CVS that have to buy medicines and vaccines and other medical devices from companies like Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, right? So in a typical business-to-business relationship, organizations have to all the time interact and exchange business transactions, whether it's sharing inventory, sending purchase orders, getting shipment notices, invoices, and making payments. So there is a constant exchange of business transactions back and forth between organizations to complete a typical buying and selling cycle. And at the same time, there are also a very important element in the overall B2B partner ecosystem where organizations need help to physically move goods from one place to another, right? It can be moving finished products from a manufacturing plant to a warehouse, or it can be moving raw materials from a supplier location to the manufacturing plant. And these shipments can be domestic, they can be international, they can be intercontinental. So there is that brings companies that provide logistics and transportation services into the mix. So essentially, all of these organizations have to work hand in hand with each other to complete the supply chain value system. And B2B and electronic data interchange standards have been facilitating these types of workflows that are critical for any and all industries, whether we are implementing a procure to pay, order to cash, logistics, warehouse management, or any of these business processes and workflows. That will almost always have an element of B2B and EDI integration involved to extend those integrations with a vast B2B partner ecosystem. So with that out of our way, we're going to be now again like some statistics for those of you not familiar. 75% of B2B ordering happens through EDI, which is a very significant amount. And you can also see that EDI, like after a small drop in the growth between 2020 and 2022, the growth in EDI has picked up more momentum in 2023 as most companies are kind of coming back to um, out of the pandemic induced disruptions. So we will continue to see those growth from the EDA front, helping organizations to effectively interact and integrate with their business partner ecosystem. So now let's go back to the kind of the basics, right? On what does EDI really mean, right? If we look at EDI, you can kind of parallelize that with something or a concept that enables streamlined conversation between businesses. So if we take an example of a retailer like Walmart or Amazon, all the products that we buy from Amazon or Walmart or any retailer for that matter, they don't necessarily manufacture those products, right? They have to actually buy or source those products from one of the thousands and thousands of suppliers that provide those products to these retailers that we are able to walk into the stores and grab them or place online orders to get them sent to our homes. So in a typical conversation between a retailer and supplier starts with the retailer asking the supplier, hey supplier, can you ship X quantity of this product A and Y quantity of this product B to our warehouse? And this is not happening over a chat or over an email or a phone call, right? And they cannot be doing it at that kind of a scale where they have thousands of stores and thousands of suppliers to get products from. So all of these are fully end-to-end automated conversation that happen between systems. But if we want to equate that to a typical conversation, this is how it starts, right? When they are running short of when they are running short of stock for a particular item, their ERP system understands where they need to buy the products from and how to send those transactions out to the suppliers. So it starts off with the retailer sending out a purchase order to the supplier, asking for some products of some quantities to be sent somewhere, right? Some facility of theirs. It can be a warehouse or it can be a store or it can be anything. And then the supplier basically receives that conversation and they acknowledge saying that, hey, I have those products and I have those quantities and I can definitely send you those products to your facility. And then once they commit to fulfilling that order, they then make arrangement to ship the product. Like it's like these are typically shipments that are sent in truckloads. It's not like packing something and dropping off in a FedEx or a UPS store, right? And these have to be well managed shipments that get sent through full truckload or less than a truckload or different modes of transportation depending on the kind of products and the quantity of the products and whatnot. So they have to basically, if they are preparing a shipment, they have to send that information to the retailer so that they know when it is coming and they can make arrangements to receive those shipments and put those products in their warehouse in a timely manner. Like oftentimes, especially when grocery companies are buying products from companies that supply producers like your fruits or vegetables, they cannot be kind of held in outside for a long time, right? They have to make sure there are people that are receiving those producers and putting them in a warehouse control, sorry, climate controlled warehouses in a timely manner. So a lot of these transactions are extremely business critical and time sensitive. So exchanging them in the right format and in the right time is super critical for businesses to thrive. And once the shipment is sent, the supplier needs to get paid. So they send an invoice out, tell them how much they own and what products and what quantities, and item level breakdown of the invoice amount. And finally, the retailer makes the payment, and then they basically just shake hands and thank each other. So this is basically what happens, right? From if we want to equate what happens between a retailer and a supplier. But then, like, this is where EDI transactions come into play, right? To help organizations to streamline this communication, so that there is a standardized way of exchanging these transactions. So each company shouldn't necessarily have to define their own data formats, right? If they do, then we have to build hundreds and thousands of maps to convert data from each organization's format into the other organization's format, which is not scalable. So we will you probably already know, or you're probably getting familiar with some of these transaction types. So the X12 850, it's for purchase order. So there is also an equivalent edifact message type for purchase orders. So end of the day, so this typical interaction is facilitated by a well-defined set of EDA standards and message types. And now, to extend this, like in the previous slide, we talked about retailer and supplier having to work with logistics companies. So if we take an example of this, like some XYZ Logistics or XPO, who are the logistics partner that is shipping this? So the supplier has to actually have a conversation with this XPO Logistics, right, on the other side. So that is going to look like the shipper asking the logistics partner, hey, can you move this freight from place A to place B? And then they respond back saying, yes, I do have a truck and a trailer and a driver. I can definitely help you move that shipment from here to here. Or if they don't have the equipment and the driver available, they will probably decline that they cannot move the shipment, and the shipper will have to find a different carrier to uh, get that service to send that shipment out from LA to Seattle, for instance. If the carrier says they can definitely move it because they have the driver, truck, and a trailer, then they basically go through the process of picking up the shipment and then providing an ETA. Then, as the shipment progresses from the shipper location to the consignee location, they send periodic status updates on where the shipment is and when it is expected to arrive. If there are any delays, they get communicated as well. And lastly, the shipment gets delivered on a particular time, and they send an invoice out. They make the payment, and everyone is happy. And this brings another set of transaction types, if you're talking X12, into the picture, right? End of the day, these are just two very common and very most prevalent use cases from a EDA standpoint, but these two just don't cover all of what you can do with EDI. There are hundreds of other document types that are handy in different instances and use cases, but this is more to kind of give an idea of what kind of business value EDA standards provide for organizations. Um, and just to keep going, so we talked about retailers, supplier, logistics. There is also, if we look at healthcare businesses, the hospitals, like the healthcare providers, they when they kind of treat a patient, and they typically send claims transactions to the insurance companies, which we call them as payers. So there is a lot of interactions, and that is another area where EDA transactions are extremely heavily utilized. So, with that understanding of the business and functional context to where EDI helps organizations with, let's go into the some of the fundamental basics of what an EDA message looks like. Right? I think most of the people in this call may be already familiar, and this may be redundant information. But for those of you that are new to EDI and you're trying to get your heads on understanding what how to deal with EDA messages in terms of how to map them or how to build integrations in MuleSoft with EDI integration requirements. So this is how an EDA purchase order looks like, right? It may look like it is actually something that was defined 3-4 decades back. So it looks like some kind of a delimited flat file. It indeed is. So to understand the EDA message structure, uh, any external message, it starts and ends with a what we call as an interchange. So the first segment starting with ISA is called as interchange start, and then it will have a corresponding interchange end segment. So anything in between is called as one interchange. So it has information like who the sender is, who the receiver is, and then each interchange will have its own unique control number, which is the blue number that you see here, which is 34. And the trailer, as you can notice here, it will also have the same number. So if you get a 34 here and a 35 here, it means it's an invalid EDA data. So there are those validations and all those things that are we don't have to worry about it, or EDI capabilities within MuleSoft will automatically perform those validations and flag any transactions that are not valid. So that's your very first kind of segment in a XML message. So you can think of it as a postal envelope that you put multiple documents inside a postal envelope and send it to one of your business partners. So you can think of this as kind of your envelope. You put your from address, to address, and a tracking number. You can equate the interchange to something like that in a physical document exchange. And in X12, there is also another inner envelope called functional group. So the GS stands for group start and GE stands for group end. So there can be multiple GS loops within the same interchange. So that is your inner envelope of your EDI transmission. So this will have information like what version of the group that is used, and the GS also does have its own control number. So 547 that you see here, and you also will have the same 547 at the trailer segment, which is the group end segment. So they have to basically match. And then it also has the from identifier and the to identifier and sometimes stamp value. And this PO basically stands for, it's called as the function ID or functional group ID, and it stands for purchase order. And inside of the functional group is what we have transaction set. So the transaction set is your ultimate business document. So there can be multiple transaction sets inside the same functional group. So in this example, we only have one 850 transaction, which is the purchase order, but you can typically expect to get multiple purchase orders sent in the same transmission. If they have different products to be shipped to different locations for the same company, they typically tend to group them all together in one interchange and group and put multiple transaction sets inside that. So the transaction set control, the transaction set, in this case, it's an 850. It has a control number one, and you will also see the same control number in the end segment also. Inside of the transaction set is where your actual business document information is presented. So there is a header here at the beginning. So this any point 11 is my purchase order number, and there is a PO date, and there are a bunch of reference numbers that are included. And there is also this N1 to N4 is basically the location loop. So in this case, the ST stands for ship to. So basically, they want this PO number to be shipped to this address in San Francisco. So that's essentially what this data talks about. And this is the buyer's information. So if you have any questions about fulfilling, maybe they can reach out to this buyer at this email address. So it basically has very similar information like what you will typically see in a paper-based purchase order transaction, but this is more facilitating an end-to-end automation, so you don't have to look at some data and then type in or process them in a manual way. After the header, so in a typical PO, you would expect your line items, like which products you want and what is the quantity that you are expecting. So in this example, we have 4 PO1 loops. So each PO1 loop corresponds to one line item. So this is my first item, and I want 100 quantities of that. This is my second item. I want 200 quantities of that, so on and so forth. So end of the day, it has some meaningful information, including the PO number, the date, where the items need to be shipped to, and what are the items and the quantities, right? So all of this makes up for a valid purchase order transaction that can be parsed through EDI software like our external connector and partner manager and translated to an internal data format like an IDOC or a JSON or a CSV or anything for that matter, and sent to the backend system where the orders get created and executed on, right? So with this understanding, and I'm sure this was repetitive for a lot of folks that have been doing EDA for a long time, but it was just to ground everyone on the call on what EDA message looks like. So now let's get straight into looking at how we can perform EDA data transformations in DataWeave in Anypoint Studio. Sabrina or Sarah, was there any questions so far, or are we good to move? Just want to take a quick pause and see if there's any question.
There's just a question about your presentation, if it'll be available, and the answer is yes, it will be
Okay.
available on the webpage along with the
Okay.
recording.
Okay. Awesome. So what we are going to be doing in this kind of the rest in the next 40 minutes or so is to actually kind of build an EDA transformation map from the scratch. So obviously, in all practical purposes, when you have the need to integrate with multiple partners, you would be ultimately using Anypoint Partner Manager for all of your data, where you can kind of create your partner profiles. You can then create your partners validation settings for your external messages. So Partner Manager does provide a lot of those controls on controlling how you're processing your messages. And eventually, inside of Partner Manager, you would create what we call as a message flow. If I pick up this example, so in the message flow, you specify how the message is received and the validations and acknowledgement settings. And you have a map that you would put in the message flow to translate that EDI data into in internal data format. And then the internal message is then getting sent to your process API that sends the data to Salesforce Order Management or SAP or NetSuite or wherever the data needs to go to. So what we're going to be focusing more on is how you kind of build this map, right? So that's the most fundamental part in building any EDA integration. And we're going to go and emphasize more on how this step is done. So let's go into Anypoint Studio. So I'm going to actually close out some of the previously built projects and create a new Mule application. So let's call this as Mule Community EDI Mapping. Okay, let's call it as version 2. And the only reason, like if you're using Partner Manager for your EDI processing needs, you would still be building the data transformations in DataWeave in Studio. And while doing that, you are able to perform unit testing of your mapping and make sure you're not missing out anything. So you don't want to build a map that is not fully validated and deploy it in Partner Manager, run transactions, and find issues, and then kind of keep making trial and error. The best practice to follow is to properly build the data weave transformation in Studio, perform unit testing, and you can also leverage things like your MUnit suites and all the goodness that Anypoint Studio offers to automate a lot of these validation steps. We're not going to go into the MUnit and other things in today's session, but it is something that we strongly recommend so that you are building the map and you're testing it fully in a local environment and bringing it into Partner Manager so that you don't run into surprises and take it back to Studio and do any rework. So let's use a now drag and drop a HTTP listener. So what this means is we are basically putting an HTTP interface on top of this flow. So you can kind of send an EDI data through Postman to this application to run tests and validations before you bring the map into Partner Manager. So let's create a new HTTP configuration. So let's call this as EDI as the base path. And let's put X12 4010 850 to, let's say, we are going to translate this into a JSON structure. And let's put so we can put some log entries if you want to log something. So the next step in an inbound EDA mapping scenario is you would want to drag and drop an external read. So here in this environment, so the external connector is already kind of added uh, to the local system. And if you don't see the external showing up here, you can try looking for it in Exchange and search for external and add that to your workspace. So let's drag and drop the external EDA read operation here. So when you do that, you have to create a connector configuration like you will for any point connector that you use in Studio. So let's create one. So let's call this as external EDA 4010 850 read configuration. So one of the things that you will have to do as the first step when you're at this stage is to define the path to the schema. So when you add an X12 connector to your AnyPoint, your Mule application, it automatically adds your connector dependencies and all the included libraries and schemas. So I'll show you where to find the schema files from once we are done configuring this step. So here I'm specifying I'm looking for X12 4010 and 850, and you will see an ESL file, which stands for EDI Schema Language, which is more like an YAML-based definition of the structure of your EDI message types for each version and each document type. So let's select that, and you don't have to actually put any identifier or anything. If you put it, like, it will actually perform in validation. But in the case of a read, you don't have to put anything, which will basically help you to quickly validate your transmission maps that we are going to build. And here, one thing that is strongly recommended is to turn off this uh, require unique interchanges. So as we saw in the example data that we saw, so there is the interchange control number, right? If this require unique interchange is set to true, you would have to change that value every time you are running a test. But especially since we are in a state where we are still developing the map and we want to test and validate with the same data file until we fully build the map out. So it's strongly recommended to set this to false so that you don't have to worry about increasing the control number every time you run your test to validate your map as the map is still getting built. And you will also see a bunch of other validation rules that you can enable or disable. So you can use them as appropriate based on the specifications of your partners. So I'm not going to touch anything. So I'm just going to do this. So once you specify your message type and configure the connection, uh, the next step that you will do is to actually drag and drop a transform component. When you do that, since we specified the 4010 850 as the message type, you will see the source message structure is automatically getting rendered. So you don't have to import any schema or anything. So all you need to do is to just put the external read configuration and specify the version and the document type. And data sense, which is part of AnyPoint Studio, automatically senses the structure of your message based on the operations before and after the transform component, and it renders the message structure. So at this point, you can expand here, and you can actually go through so this is where your GS information comes, and this is where your interchange, the ISA segment information comes. And if you expand the heading, so this is where your PO number and all those header level information comes. So all of this happens automatically without us having to kind of import any data files or schemas, but based on the selections made in the XML read component. So one of the other important feature that is extremely useful that cuts down the development time when you're building the mapping is the real-time preview. So for the real-time preview to work, you actually need to supply a sample input data. So what the XML read operation does is it basically reads an EDI-XML message and creates a Java object representation of that message. So you need to actually put the Java object as the input file to actually get the preview of your translated output as you're building the mapping. So what I'm going to do is to change this to a JSON and just output the Java object as a JSON message so that I can actually use that as my input. So now we are saving this project and let's go and run this project to get that JSON equivalent of the EDA message, which we will then use to further map it into an actual application message structure eventually. While the project is getting built, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating a Postman request to call this project. Postman is taking a bit of time here. So we have this HTTP project EDI, and need to copy this path that we created. And body, I'm going to be just sending the EDA data. So I have a copy of that EDA data here. Copying this. Okay, I have this EDA data pasted here. So let's go and check if the project has started. So it's deployed. So I'm going to be running this, and I should be getting a JSON message back. So this is your EDA data converted into a JSON. Obviously, this is not what our ultimate JSON target structure looks like, but we are going to be using this as the input to the map to actually build the actual JSON canonical mapping. So we'll keep it handy. So my goal here is to actually convert this EDI data into this JSON structure. So this is my JSON example, so where I have the B2B message with a header that contains information like your sender ID, receiver ID, and other information. And then you have the PO with some header information and the ship to location, for example, and the line items. So there are 4 items here in this example, and I want those information to be kind of presented in this format. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be copying this sample JSON message. You could also, the best practice to do is to actually bring in a JSON schema so that it has the definition of all the fields that you're expecting in the JSON message. So you're not missing out anything that you could potentially miss if you're using an example. But to keep this demonstration simple, I'm using a JSON example. So I'm copying the JSON example file here in my project. So now I go into the transform component and create what we call as a metadata type to define my canonical purchase order JSON message. So let's call this as inbound purchase order JSON, create. And here you would select JSON. You could also select XML or whatever format that you want to change to. Since we are going to go with an example, I'm selecting the example and select the JSON file that we just copied into the project. So when you do that, you will be able to review and make sure you are importing the right file. So it has all the constructs of my purchase order JSON message. So I select that. So now we are in a state where on the left side you have your extrude 4010 850, on the right side you have your intended or desired JSON output with all the fields defined. So this is potentially going to be the structure in which you would send the data after the translation to a process API, which then kind of calls a system API to send the data to an system like in Salesforce Order Management or SAP or NetSuite or whatever it is. So now what we are actually going to be doing is, so we are going to actually, I'm going to actually delete this transform component and build as if I'm building it new. And you have your input, and here you would select the message type. So if you are having multiple flows, you can reuse the message type definitions across multiple maps. So now we have this whole thing ready to go. And let's start off with maybe a simple mapping of converting the, let's say this is our GS sender identifier, and I want to map this to the sender identifier in the header section of your target JSON message type. So you would simply drag and drop this. So what you can actually do here is, like, since you are doing this mapping, you don't want to kind of build the full map only to find out that you missed a couple of things or more. That basically requires rework. So this is where the data weave preview comes into play. So you can click preview, and now we don't have a sample data attached to this map. So you would click that. So it tries to create an sample payload automatically, but you would, since we already have this JSON message from the previous step, you would simply copy this and paste it. And when you do that, you will see that, so for what we have built in the mapping, it produces this as the output JSON message. So now we can switch back to the context section, and you will see that, so this actually automatically populates those values based on the information available in the sample data that is supplied. That will be very handy in performing your eventual mapping. So let's say there is a receiver ID field. So we want to map this receiver code here. And as you drag and drop your input value to the output, you will actually see that output appearing in the preview section. So you exactly know what your map produces as an output. So you can make any corrections as needed immediately without having to bring it into a partner manager and then run some tests and then find issues and come back to the drawing board. So you can eliminate a lot of those unnecessary rework by taking advantage of the real-time preview option within DataWeave. There are also a lot of cool things within DataWeave. Like for instance, if you want to apply some quick transformations on quick functions on these fields. So you can, for example, right now this is all uppercase, right? If you want to change this to lowercase, you can hand type your functions, or you can simply select this, which adds your lower function to your mapping, and magically this value gets changed to lowercase, right? So those are some of the quick functions that you can take advantage of, or you can also browse through a library of extensive set of functions that DataWeave as a product provides to perform common things like string operations or math operations or conditional checks and things of that nature. So let's say if you want to do this camelize, so it basically applies some of those uh, things automatically to your data output. Uh, So what is going on? So let's go back to the basics. So the next thing that we want to actually map is, let's say we want to map the date time into this. So I think there is the tooling is having some issues. So let's wait for that to complete. So the next thing that we want to actually do is, let me actually go back, and I think these are things that most of the developers are kind of familiar anyways. Okay, so let's go back to the, okay, I'll probably stop the project so that it doesn't interfere with the map development. Okay. So let's go into the heading, and let's say in the data, we want to map the PO number from the BG03, which is the purchase order number. If you hover your mouse over any data field, it will basically show the label of the data. So you can drag and drop this from the PO number to this. So it automatically builds your mapping logic. And this is your purchase order type code, and you want to map it to this PO type field. And if you want to map, this is your purpose code, and you want to map it. And let's see if the preview is back. So let me actually do one thing, and I'm probably going to maybe let's build the map fully and then run it locally to get the translated data output. And let's say we want to map the date to the PO date. And here you can kind of do things like if you want to only retain the date portion, because as you can see in the input, you're actually getting the even the time field coming as the actual data gets converted into the JSON object. So you can perform and leverage some of the core date and time functions that DRV provides to manipulate or enrich the data as you like. And let's go into, like, for instance, to the detail where you have the line item information. So if we look at this, these segments, so these are our line item fields with the product ID and the quantity. So let's start off with the quantity, for instance. So let's expand the PO line items here and drag and drop the quantity. So data sense actually kind of, you see the PO1 loop is an array, and PO line items on the JSON message is also an array. So what it does is it understands the structure on both sides, and it automatically builds the looping logic to iterate through each of the PO line item field and produces your desired output. So let's see if the preview still doesn't work. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to just to show the preview capabilities. I'm going to potentially restart my workspace, and as it restarts, I'll probably take any questions the team may have. Sarah, do we have any questions on the
There
from the
were
team?
there was a couple that came in earlier on the Q&A section.
Mhm.
Um, so Sanjana says, is it compulsory to have any partner manager for all the projects which implement EDI transactions?
Can you repeat that question?
Is it compulsory to have partner manager for all projects which implement EDI?
It is while this is loading, right? I'll probably go into partner manager, right? So in a typical world, so you would have the need to integrate with multiple partners, right? If you're doing integrations with just like one or two partners, maybe you can do away without it. But in most cases, the business users typically want to be able to search for transactions, right? If you are doing it without partner manager, you have to build your own UI where business users can go and perform searches. So on the other hand, in partner manager, you have this nice page called activity where you have visibility into all the transactions that are processing in and out. If you want to, for example, I have a bunch of transactions coming from different partners. So if I want to search for data coming from one particular partner, I can simply filter and I can see the transactions from that partner alone, right? So this is something that you would not get if you're not doing it in Partner Manager. The other important thing is you're typically exchanging thousands and thousands of transactions with your business partners all the time. And if you have a business user that is complaining about not having a PO number in the ERP system, if you're doing it in Studio or in a Mule application without Partner Manager, you have to rely on your logs, right? So it almost always brings in the IT person to uh, spend a lot of time in troubleshooting issues uh, as the transactions are processed, right? So here, for instance, if we want to search for a particular purchase order number like this one, uh, Vue can actually make use of the built-in function to search for specific transactions, right? You can define what fields that you want to track and then type in the field name and search for that order. It's actually going to bring in all the transactions associated to that order. And once you are in here, if they are complaining about, hey, this field in the ERP is not showing up, so all you need to do is to just go into the transaction detail and you can view the payload. So in this case, it's an artifact data. So you can look at what data came in from the customer, and you can also look at what data was sent to the process API, right? All in a single interface. So if you're doing it without Partner, you have to figure out how you can provide a similar experience, which is critical for most business and operational users from a transaction search and tracking standpoint. The other thing, like while the project is still loading, you a lot of times these transactions could also fail, right? For example, this data that I'm going to send, it has a really long PO number, which while it's the external standard definitions. So when I send this, it's actually going to fail, and it's going to result in a failed status. And when it happens, whether it's a successful processing or failed processing, you have to, in the EDA parlance, you have to return a functional acknowledgement indicating whether the transaction is accepted or rejected, right? So we just sent it out, and if I go here into the activity, so you can also build a quick process to call the Partner Manager API that alerts you when such failures happen. So here we see that the transaction that we just sent, it failed. So you can come here, you can search for transaction that failed, and then you get into this, and you can go inside of the transmission transaction detail and navigate into the transmission ID, and that is going to tell you exactly why the transaction failed, right? And you will also see that when the transaction failed, we sent a 997 back to the partner, indicating that it failed and we rejected this transaction because of this PO number being too long, right? So if you don't have partner manager, you have to actually build all the mapping that generates these acknowledgements and all the visibility that partner manager provides out of the box. I hope that it was a long response. I hope that was helpful for uh, for whoever asked the question. Okay, so let's go here. And is there any other question, Sarah, or is that the major one?
Yes, there is another one. And Sanjana says, thank you for answering her question, by the way. Another question from Vera Palapu. Actually, he has 3 questions. So
Sure, let's take them.
the first one is, how many different ISA 08 are allowed to be created in one partner manager business group?
For ISA 08 or?
Yes, ISA 08.
There isn't any specific limit. Is it like how many interchanges in a particular partner can be created? Maybe if Veera can expand on the question, that'll be helpful. Like for example, let's go to a different partner here.
Vera, if you can expand in the Q&A box for Vijayan.
Is it more of kind of how many with the same value can be created? If it is, there isn't any kind of necessarily any limitation. You can create multiple of them in the same partner profile. So let's kind of quickly show this. And you can create as many as you would like inside a partner profile, unless I totally misunderstood the question, and you can clarify that in the chat, Veera.
So he got the answer for number 1, he said, so thank you. He also wants to know how many business groups we can create under one license.
Business group, it has partner manager has nothing to do with how many business groups you can create. It boils down to the subscription tier of your Anypoint license. So if you're in gold or in a starter package, I think you're limited to only one business group. But if you're on advanced or platinum titanium, you can create multiple business groups. But end of the day, it's partner manager does not control. It's more of a standard Anypoint platform question. But if you have the ability to create multiple business groups, and under each business group, you can have multiple environments, and you can ideally technically have one partner manager instance in each business group, or you can have just one partner manager instance for one business group that serves all your business groups as a central B2B integration platform. So here I'm in Mythical 3 in this business group. I have partner manager in almost all of these business groups that you see here. And inside of each business group, I can navigate and switch between the environments. So these are the same business groups and environments that are used in a typical MuleSoft development lifecycle. So Sarah, we'll take the next question after now the preview is working again. So now let's go and, for example, map a couple other fields. I know we are getting closer to the time, but I'll share in there are examples of EDA mappings published in Anypoint Exchange. So the objective of today's session was to just kind of show how to get started. And the examples that we're going to share from Exchange will contain fully built mapping that will help to extend what you learned today. So let's just build a couple more fields here and take maybe any other questions in the next 5 minutes before we wrap up. So let's say we have mapped a couple of fields in the header segment. So let's now map this PGO3, which is the purchase order number, into the PO number field. And as we do that, you will see the output getting automatically populated. And let's map this thing to the PO type and this to the PO purpose. And let's actually go into one of the details segments and map some of the line item information here. So this is your quantity ordered. So let's map the quantity first. So as I said earlier, it automatically understands the structure on either side of the mapping, and it creates the looping logic and everything. So you don't have to hand type some of these logics. So as long as you just simply drag and drop stuff, it will automatically get built. So here we have the line item ID. So let's map that. And you will also notice that in the PO102, the quantity in the EDI is a number. And here, for whatever reason, we have defined the quantity as a string, like in the JSON. So data sense automatically understands that this is a number that we are mapping into a string field, and it automatically also creating the type casting of coursing the number into a string field. So a lot of those things happen just, it's pure magic that DataView is able to provide. And let's map the unit price. So again, like the unit price in the EDA is a number that, as you can see here, and the unit price here is a string. So the moment you drag and drop this here, you will see it automatically adding the as string to typecast the number to a string field. And you will see the output getting built as you drag and drop your data fields. So let's say this is my product ID. So let's map that here. And then I have the product description, I think, somewhere in the PID segment. So let's map this PID 05, which is the product description, into this item description. And you will see that, so the PID is a loop. So you will see this item description is getting mapped as an array, which is not our desired outcome. So in that case, what you can do is to just take the first value instead of mapping the entire array. Understandably, you will have only one PID 05 in each of the PID loop. So that basically builds your quantity, the item number, and the description and whatnot right in your output. The other thing that I want to actually show just before we wrap up is the ability to filter things, right? So let's go back to this data that we are using for the example. So here you have in the EDA data, you typically have multiple references like your bill of lading number, your order number, shipment number. There are bunch of reference values that the customers can send in the EDA data. And in the reference segment, the first field in the reference segment basically is called as the qualifier. So if it is AH, it basically means this value is an agreement number. If it is 12, it basically means it is your account number, for instance. So you basically have to rely on the value of the qualifier to understand what this means. So here in this example, we have two values. So there is a BL, there is a 12, and there is an AH. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and map the reference value from the input to output. So let's say in the JSON message, I have two fields like called agreement number and the billing account number. So let's say this is if it is 12, it is actually the billing account number. So let's drag and drop this to the billing account number. And as you can understandably, you will see two values that is getting populated to this field because it is actually mapping both the reference values because we have two reference segments in the input. So now you have to actually apply some filtering, right, to actually map only the reference value based on the reference qualifier. So to do that, DataWeave offers some really cool filtering capabilities where you can use this construct. And when you type this, you basically get shown what field you want to filter on. And you can put, let's say if it is 12, I want to take that reference 2 as my billing account number. And then since it is still an array, you would have to index it with a 0. So now you have basically mapped just the corresponding billing account number in your output field with some simple filtering logic. And let's say we have to do the same thing with the agreement number. So you can see again like drag and drop, or you can simply copy this previously built logic. And now I want to take this because this is if it is AH, this is my agreement number. So I just change the condition to AH, and that basically is showing up the agreement number in the output, right? So this is a very common use case in the EDA where you have multiple loops. Like similarly, if you look at this data, you have one in one, which is the ship to address, and there is also another in one, which is your bill to address. So here we have two different objects inside the JSON. One is ship to and one is bill to. So you can actually apply the same logic to filter out the just the ship to address and map it to the ship to address in your output. It's not going to go into it in the example that I'm going to share in Exchange is going to actually cover a lot of those aspects. But I know we are already at time, so I'm going to be wrapping up in a minute after flashing this Exchange asset that you can use as a reference to learn more about how you can build EDI mapping. So if you go to any point Exchange and search for B2B/EDI, so you'll have to think that can be extremely beneficial if you're building integrations for inbound orders and outbound shipments and invoices. This example would be the go-to. If you're working for in a procure to pay use case where you're sending outbound orders to a supplier or a vendor and getting inbound uh, shipment and POAX and invoices. So this procure to pay example. So they are basically just two sides of the same workflow, depending on whether you are a supplier or a retailer. So if you go inside this example, you have example mapping for X12. You also have, if you download this project and open it up in Studio, you will have examples for Edifact, XMLs, and other formats that will be a good reference starting point for doing typical EDI data transformations. And that was it. I hope this was useful for people that want to get started off with building EDI transformation mappings in MuleSoft.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vijayan. Thank you everyone for attending. Just a reminder, we will be sharing the recording of this video likely tomorrow or early next week on the same webpage as where you registered for this event. I will also make sure that the link is shared if you are in our Slack channel. Thank you again. If you have any questions, please let me know and I can get you in contact with our wonderful Sarah and Vijayan. And let's give a round of applause for 3 awesome B2B crash course sessions. And we really appreciate those who have joined all 3. We'll also be celebrating you all next week. It's just a little thank you for graduating from this crash course. So thanks again, and we'll see you at our next meetup. Bye, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Bye.